Thank you. Firstly, okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the first of the many engaging conversations under the Ask WEP series. The Women Entrepreneurship Platform WEP in India operates as a classic public-private model that serves as a unified platform for women entrepreneurs to access essential services and information through strategic partnerships. WEP is organized into a two-tier governance system. The steering committee convenes on a quarterly basis to deliberate, guide, and direct, while the executive committee is responsible for translating the steering committee's plans into actionable tasks with clear timelines for execution. During our inaugural steering committee meeting that was held in February 2023, in fact, here very much at the Niti Aayog headquarters, we discussed a range of critical issues facing women entrepreneurs in India today. One key issue that emerged was the need to address the pervasive fear of failure that often holds back promising entrepreneurs from reaching their full potential. To help tackle this challenge head-on, we are thrilled to welcome a renowned entrepreneur and business leader, Ronnie Screwvala, with us to our upcoming panel discussion, Fear to Freedom. The maverick entrepreneur is a well-known name in the Indian business world, having started his entrepreneurial journey in the media and entertainment industry. His penchant for taking risks and pushing boundaries has earned him the moniker of the maverick entrepreneur. But as any successful business owner would know, that with great risks comes the possibility of failure. Ronnie has had his fair share of failures and he wears them like a badge of honor. With his extensive experience in navigating failure, Ronnie's expertise lies in guiding people to turn these experiences into very valuable learning opportunities. Lastly, Ronnie is a firm believer in paying it forward. He has founded several charitable organizations, including the Swades Foundation, which aims to empower the rural communities in India. His endeavors into esports is something that we will touch upon during one of our Q&A questions later right now. But as we gear up for the International Women's Day, the WEP's campaign on Ask WEP, which is hashtag Ask WEP, was in fact an open platform where aspiring and established business owners could come and use this campaign to ask questions with industry experts or to industry experts without having any sort of barriers in terms of getting themselves answered. So we are very happy to kickstart this. And then later on, we have one with Ms. Sangeeta Reddy in the next couple of weeks. We're looking forward to many more in these series. Ronnie, welcome and thank you for giving us this time and opportunity. We know I can imagine how busy you are, so this means a lot. And
no, I think this is a very impactful hour, and I'm very happy to be part of it. And Yashoda, just as an opening comment for I think everybody, because I think we said we're actually born with freedom. Then we encompass fear, and right. Because we're handling fear, we get into failure. So I think the problem is not from fear to failure or from failure to freedom. It's actually from freedom, you then actually succumb to it and then you get to fear. And then because of that, you actually fail. So I think how do we get back to really feeling that sense of freedom? And we'll talk about that in the next one hour.
No, I think that's such an interesting point that you make, because we almost forget that when we are born, essentially we're always free. And then the fear actually just encompasses our life, and we almost forget that we were free at some point in time. So thank you for bringing that back into perspective, Ronnie. But we've got a barrage of questions from women entrepreneurs, and I'm going to dive right that in because this 60 minutes is dedicated for them more than anyone else here. I'm going to start with a quote from Winston Churchill where he says, "Success is not final and failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." Most people will focus on the second idea, which is failure is not fatal. But right now, I'm more interested in the first part, which is success is not final. Change is the only certainty, Ronnie. I mean, and we know that because, it could be an earthquake or a pandemic, an accident or a war, or even bad luck, or even bad news that can hit you. So what can we do to make these difficult times a little more manageable?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good place to start off in, and I think success is transient. I have a phrase that I've lived with for the last 30 years, which is that all glory is fleeting. And it really is. And I think in the media industry, I can tell you when I started with that, you learn that pretty often all the time, right? Because you have something that can take you up and then the next day before you know it. I think for a lot of people, we should also be clear that we should not get too much distracted by so much of the noise around us. I think part of the whole process is how do you clean up the noise? Because we talk about focus, and then we think focus is doing one thing at a time. Most of the time, it's not that. It's also focusing your mind. So first, since you brought up, war and all the other transients, of course, by external factors, but take out the noise from it, because not all of those things may be relevant for you. Basically, you need positive energy, and you're not going to get positive energy if you're only going to start sucking in all the negative energy that comes with the environmental situations. So it's a small one. It's not an easy one, but it's actually one of the first things to really get into. Close out a lot of the noise around you and figure out, for my business, for what I want to do over the next 1 year, 2 years, and 3 years, how is this going to impact me? Because then you'll be able to take the clutter out. And that's the first part. That brings in a certain sense of positivity. Second, yes, absolutely, success is transient, because your benchmark for success is normally to keep aiming for something quite higher.
Right.
Neither is failure a full stop, nor is success a tipping of the den, as you would do when we, played games in school, because you just tip the den and then you move out from there. Right. And so to that extent, I think for everyone, it's important to savor success. It is important to celebrate success. It is important for it to really recharge you. But the last thing you need to do is waste time on taking success for granted, because of the simple reason that that's when I've seen many organizations, entrepreneurs and companies, where you take anything for granted. So the only message I would say for success is transient is you can't take anything for granted. Because the minute you do, you get complacent. You start getting slightly arrogant, very self-confident, bordering on arrogance again. And that is the beginning of the end.
Yeah, I think that, it's interesting how you said that you get slightly arrogant. I mean, and certain warning signs that I think we can all take away and make sure that, those are internal checks and balances that we can have in our minds as we kind of traverse this ground. I have with us Ronnie Acharya, who's the founder and CEO of Map My Genome. She introduced the concept of personal genomics in India with the launch of Genome Patri in 2013. Anu, over to you for your question to Ronnie.
Thanks so much, Yashodhara, and hi, Ronnie.
Hi.
So the first question I want to ask you is that, a lot of the previous studies that we've seen on the genetics of entrepreneurship, they showed that there was about 30-40% influence of genes, but it differed between men and women, because women needed to have the right genes to succeed because the environment was harsh. Now, we are again conducting a study to understand this in the Indian context with Niti Aayog. Do you think that the recent deluge of incubators and accelerators will make a difference? And will we see that, hopefully that it will not be different between the two genders or any other alternative?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think you've touched 2-3 different aspects for me to give you a very specific answer. I mean, firstly, I think the fact that congrats for taking something so in-depth as an entrepreneurial career. And it's definitely not something that is conventional, which is very inspiring and should be inspiring to a lot more people. But data is not the only thing that one can go by. And I think what I would urge you is data is important, but from data comes, an analysis, comes a lot of common sense, and comes a lot of actually being on the ground to see what's going on out there. Incubators are facilitators in some manner, but it's a little bit like the IITs, right? I mean, it's a very selective process. I mean, there are 10,000 people applying and only 100 get in. And I think, incubators is also, to be honest, is at a very nascent stage in the country. So it's nice to have them, but it's not something that qualifies, because each one has their own agenda of how they want to do that. Basically, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to be your own incubator. You're going to be your own incubator for life. And I think, so my answer to you is don't rely too much on only data. Second, I don't think so. I think this is a challenging environment. Look, when I became a first generation entrepreneur, I don't think I got more benefits from a person, whether it was male or female gender. At that time, it was a social stigma. At that time, it was, oh, so you didn't get a good job, right? So then you have to start working for yourself. At that time, it was, and it still remains with a lot of people, where parental concern is very, very high. And that's almost a headwind Because not only do you have to get past so many more people, you also have to convince your family and take them along, not fight with them, but take them along and have the buy-in. I think today more than ever to say that, okay, my son will do well in business, but my daughter will not, I think is very passé. I think it's much, much, much less. And I can tell you, I work with 1 million people in rural India, especially in the state of Maharashtra. And I think some of our best entrepreneurs, whether they're entrepreneurs doing cashew or, the SAG groups in rural India, the self-help groups in rural India, if you take them as the benchmark and as the North Star for where actually any other woman on this call or anywhere else listening would get their inspiration from, they lead. They actually do that. We have village development committees where women actually lead it. They pick the 5-year plan of how they want to make their dream village into a dream village. So I think it's about opportunity, and it's about you just opening up and not worrying about data and the concept that, oh, I'm in for it and I'm already disadvantaged. That's a very, very important takeaway.
I think that's a valuable point that you make, Ronnie, and it's almost taking a bit of a contrarian view when it comes to data, where you say that you cannot kind of look at it. We have to look at it with a certain amount of circumspect, in the sense that there is a lot of other things to kind of look at, to combine that view with, and it should act as a supporting fact and not the only fact. That kind of also brings me to one of the questions that was asked on the platform, and I'm taking from that vein of that question, I've derived this one, which says that, you also mentioned that you were a first-gen entrepreneur. So I'm sure you must have faced this at some point in time in your life, where having a solid grasp of your finances, and especially cash flows, managing strategic financial decisions, was very, very imperative for you to even run and survive with your business. So, Ronnie, as someone who has founded and grown now with so many successful businesses, what tips or best practices can you offer to women entrepreneurs in terms of understanding and managing their business numbers more effectively?
So look, I think it is very important for any entrepreneur of any genre to actually understand commerce, commercial aspects. Again, it's a little bit like failure. If you start getting fearful of failure, it's going to come and attack you. The other part is a lot of people have a dead thing when it comes to technology. Oh, I'm not from tech, so what do I do? Similarly, a lot of people actually have get blinded by the context of, I'm not a finance person. Yeah. And that's why I'm saying you don't need to be a finance person, but you need to understand commercial aspects of everything you want to do. The very fact that you decided that this was a business idea has already a starting tick that you understand the commerce of what you necessarily want to do. If not, and if you're only passionate about an idea and haven't figured that out, I would urge you not to and stop, because no amount of finance or anybody else that you get there. So of course you'll get help along the way, like you'll get a technology person and a product person or a finance person, but you need to understand commercial aspects, because when the chips are down, your colleagues will give you financial data. They will give you a lot of other stuff, but the basic element of commercialness you need to understand. And if you don't, it is going to be a bit of a challenge for you as you go forward. So you'll have to start honing this, but differentiate between finance, as in books of accounts and commercial and all that, and the actual commerce and commercial element of it. Because if you want to have a business mind, you don't need to always have a finance mind, because your business mind will question the finance team, will question the sales team, will question the marketing team. But if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to lead from the front.
Right, but you also did touch upon the fact that it's a skill that you have to hone. So what happens in the beginning when that skill is still underdeveloped? Then what would be the red flags that you kind of reckon?
So it's not a degree or a diploma you really need to get. You need to get into the whole thought process, right? Because when somebody says, make a plan or make a business plan or make a strategy plan, it's not about the Excel sheeting, right? Because that's the worst thing across the board. It's sometimes necessary if you have to go out there, but that's not the one. Right. How you communicate with your first 3 employees or a co-founder as to what you're building, what need you're doing that for, and therefore, how will this ever generate and get consumers in for a commercial reason is the basic element. If you haven't got that right, perfect that narrative to yourself, because that's when you realize how good or bad you are. This is not about doing a finance course and saying, I want to do, 1 year of a quick 3-month diploma on accounting. It's not important that you need to understand trial balances and debtors and creditors. You need to understand the commerce of it.
Right. No, I think that's the key. And I think that as you go along, and if you can convince yourself that why your customer would pay you for a particular product or service, then I guess that's kind of the base, and you can kind of base of the pyramid where you build things on. Our next speaker here is Miss Pooja Goel. She's the co-founder and CEO of Avishkar, a serial entrepreneur, and her last venture was IntelliThought's Learning, an early years education company which was acquired by Clay. Pooja, over to you to ask Ronnie your question.
Thanks, Yashodhara. So, Ronnie, I feel like there is something paradoxical going on here. On the one side, we see all of these role models. There is all of this noise around women participating, women leading, and how it's a good thing. I think that's the good news. We all agree that the gender gap in leadership positions need to be bridged. But when we look at the reality, something very depressing is going on, where you see venture funded, only about 2.3% venture funding goes to women-led companies. Or in India, the women labor force participation rate has been overall decreasing over the last few years. So what I see is, over the last decade or few years, a lot of interventions have started to happen, but they're mostly still directed at women. So I'm wondering, what can we do to tackle some of these systemic issues so that on the demand side, we can really generate demand and address this reasons for fear. There is a reason why women and men deal with fear differently. Fear is romanticized, but nobody runs towards kind of danger, right? So there is a reason why there is a higher level of fear, and so I'm wondering, what can we do at a systemic level to improve that?
No, Pooja, and I'll break this up into sort of two questions, and I'll just come to the run to fear and therefore, but the first part that I think you talked about, yes, the statistics are there. But I would say to everyone listening in on this and to women entrepreneurs, I think you don't need to worry about whether you're 2% or you're 0.1% of anything, because your self-conviction is to drive you. Firstly, I'm saying, practically speaking, till we manage to clean up the statistics and we get to a 60-40 or a 40-60 or a 50-50 ratio, please don't let the statistics. You could be part of 0.01% and you can still be making an impact. So all I would say is, for a lot of people feel that's my shackle. It is not. And don't believe in it, because that percentage is not going to go away with some promulgation or with a government directive. It's going to happen when a lot more people just step out and just prove themselves and do it, like all of you all are doing here and many other people would do. So that would be just my first clear input. I think the second one is, the problem is not about how many women step forward, it's about the acceptability of it. And I think that is a socio-economic reason that we need to solve on a macro basis. And that's going to take time, because it's not easy. I fully agree with you that as far as, intuitiveness is one of the best reasons why businesses succeed. You get a lot of data, and then people say, do I go on my gut feeling or I go on data? You go on actually intuition, which is a combination of incredible amount of data with all your experience of your gut, and you put it together, and that's what intuition happens. And I think that's really where people will excel. And I think women are 10 times more intuitive overall. Their ability to process the hazards, the approach, the multitasking challenges that they've used to in their careers or in their work life or in their personal life is an incredible amount of strength. So what you've got is an asset that most people on the other side don't actually accept. From a funding point of view, I think the context only seems to be where capital goes into a context that I'm here for the next 7 years. Are you here for the next 7 years? And I think that's really where the conviction of each one is to come in. Now, at different stages in your life, if you're in your 20s, people will think you're going to take time out for family. If you're in your 30s, people think you've just done with it, but you'll be distracted. If in your 40s, people will say, but you're not young enough to understand the real Gen Z and whatever else goes there. So there'll always be a reason. Again, let's not get intimidated by that. So really, to a lot of people today, all I would say is the statistics should not discourage you from anything, because the only way the statistics are going to change is when there's a tsunami. Because when the tsunami happens, it doesn't worry about, I haven't had a tsunami in 10 years and therefore I'll have one. When it happens, it just happens. Nobody goes back in history and starts figuring that out. So I think the intuition is there, the actual core aspects for women to succeed in business with a sense of commitment. And the last one I would say is the mayhem that's happening today, or is happening in the last 2-3 years, and a lot more sense has come into the system where people are building businesses to last. If women had got the same amount of resources and money that the men got to run some of these companies and blew it up on marketing, advertising, I can guarantee you the women have been much more spendthrift and they would be much more liquid, and we wouldn't be going through the crisis we're going through here for some of these insanely funded companies and sort of very arrogant founders who decided that the only way they can actually build something is by spending money on X, Y, or Z and over-indexing themselves. Women would not over-index. So to me, there's a lot going on there. Just persevere. And by the way, you don't need 100 people to invest in you. You need one. So talk to 100, but you need one finally. At the end stage, just remember you only need one.
I think you managed to get quite the female fan following after that comment, Ronnie, because I think that what you said, I think in some sense, because also the power of intuition that you touched upon on Pooja's question, and even previously when Anu spoke about data, I think we're inherently seeing that the conversation is talking about softer issues and not necessarily what numbers are throwing out there, because those are just kind of, to kind of maybe scare us or not even instill that fear. And that is the fear that we have to kind of overcome in the first place.
Yeah, and Yashodhara, I want to just say, I'm a product of soft skills. Okay, I did my BCom and then decided to. I came from a lower middle class family where all my, my brother has a PhD in HR. My dad has always been a professional as well, and I was the breakout person trying to become an entrepreneur. So at that stage, not having had the degree, my course was two things. My dad only told me at that particular stage, okay, fine, if you really want to be an entrepreneur, why don't you finish either your MBA or chartered accountancy? And to me, that was making a plan B. And if I did finish my MBA or chartered accountancy, chances are 50% that I would not have been an entrepreneur because I would have veered towards the safer part of life.
Right.
So I think that is what I would like to sort of really talk about, that is really, you made that choice and you have to just stick with it.
No, I think that it's interesting that you talk about soft skills or alternative skills that, can be a part of an entrepreneur's quiver as opposed to just the regular degrees and the standard template that the society is kind of set out for business owners today. And just taking a thread from that, we know that you forayed into esports with USports and launched India's first esports league, which is UCypher, and you're also looking at starting a federation for esports. So can you help us draw out a connection between the role of sports playing in coping that sports plays in coping with failure and learning life skills maybe, and how it can help women become better leaders and attain empowerment?
Yeah, I think sports is a very, very powerful tool. And again, I'm speaking again with my same element of, I'm not a sports person, but I know when we started our Kabaddi team here, that was just fantastic, right? Because it was a lot of people who, my team captain is a sub-inspector somewhere else. Somebody else is working the State Bank of India and Kochi, etc. And you look at that people and then you bring them out there and you give them that self-confidence for them to be on a global stage or on whatever else. It's absolutely incredible. Sports actually brings a lot of self-confidence in you. It also teaches you a lot of collaborative skills because it's a high team game. So the more you get involved in, not as an extracurricular activity. The sad part in India is that we don't take sports seriously, actually. I mean, we take cricket seriously, but that's about it. And that to watching cricket. And I'm just intrigued now that we have a women's Premier League, how many people are going to be able to look at that? But when we wanted to send 150 young boys to Germany for training for football.
Yes.
My challenge with the parents was incredible because they said, yes, that's good. No, it's a fantastic opportunity and they should go there. But will he be doing his MBA sometime? Will he be doing? And I'm saying, no, he'll have to decide to take sports as a career for life. So when people talk about risks and failure, those are the risks. Your career option is a risk. Today, when people think that becoming an entrepreneur is a risky affair, no, actually remaining in a job is as risky today because every 3 to 4 years, 25% of the workforce is in some way getting sort of, has an expiry date, which means not that you're going to be out of the workforce. It means you need to upskill yourself. You need to be on the treadmill on a constant basis, which is what you would need to do as an entrepreneur.
Right. No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that with the advent of so much that's happened even if you look at sports as the field, I think there's just so much of technology intervention that sports has also has had to embrace. Even people who have consciously taken sports as a career, they've also had to upskill tremendously, on aspects that they potentially would have never thought till a few years back that they needed a guidance on. So I think that, the whole plethora of learning has kind of changed in so many ways, and we have to embrace that no matter which profession you are in. My third entrepreneur here with me is Ms. Gitanjali J. Angmo. Gitanjali is a social entrepreneur and educationist and is currently setting up the Himalayan Institute of Alternatives in Ladakh. Gitanjali, over to you to ask Ronnie your question, please.
Yeah. So, Ronnie, we have a school here in Ladakh called SECMOL, Students Education and Cultural Movement of Ladakh. The admission criteria of which is not high percentages, but that you should have failed in your 10th grade. And when the students are taken in on a one-year program, that changes their lives and they become stars in their fields, So the university that we are also setting up, because it is based on innovation and creativity, we are trying that failure is not seen here as a stigma, because all innovation, as Edison says, 999 times when he failed, then 1,000 times was when the bulb was created. Now, I know you are the chairperson and co-founder of UpGrad, which is another innovative education project where you're trying to do several innovative things. So I'm very keen to learn from you how you're building this failure, and the resilience to cope with it into the pedagogy as a necessary ingredient of innovation, creativity, and higher order thinking.
Yeah, no, Gitanjali, thanks for the question. And firstly, accolades to you for doing that. I mean, outside of the fact that I'm sure it's not your only criterion, it's not an entrance criterion that you need to have failed 10 standard, but I think what you've made is a very strong messaging that says we're, and that's quite the antithesis, because I brought up some of the premier universities in India, all of them starting with 2 I's, for example, whether it's in management or engineering. And they actually say the reverse, right? You need to be the top of the top, and then we'll make you even more top, which is not really the challenge that people want to solve in India. And I think what you're saying is it really doesn't make a difference from an academic point of view, but we want to make you individuals who are going to be thinking. And I think that's pretty much what we're doing even at UpGrad. I mean, for us, see, education is a calendared word. It's like, it's expected of you. It's a calendared event. You go through school and you go through college. If you don't know what you're going to do. There's not much you can do till your age of 18, 19, other than study. You're not suddenly there are going to be very few people there. So I think the key challenge today that we face is that while formal degrees is great, if you're not packing it in with the soft skills and the approach to real life working, it's almost impossible to adapt and become professionals, anyone you want to be, and in any form and whatever you want to be. So I think the very fact that you are actually saying academics and structured academics and curriculum is important or relevant, but it's not as relevant or equally relevant as the soft skills is really, I think, the strong message that I think, especially in a country like India, where I think faculty is always a challenge, infrastructure is always a challenge. We'll always have more people wanting to learn than the best trainers that you can do there. And one of the things that we're doing actually differently in UpGrad is almost 20-25% of everything we teach in terms of skilling is to make you job ready more than anything else, rather than just the degree also. Focus on soft skills, focus on interview skills and whatever else. And the last one is all of us are teachers. in some form. And normally we don't really become a teacher because you feel, I haven't picked that vocation. And I think what online learning now allows everyone to do, and I think technology allows everyone to do, and I think something that you can do there also in your school, is the fact that faculty comes in, which is faculty, but about 70% of our people who teach actually are industry professionals. And that changes the entire benchmark and the criteria and the grading of what we do there. And I think the last one I would say, today, the real revolution in overall learning, and I'm not using the word education because it's a little formal, but learning is really peer-to-peer learning. I've seen in the last 5 years, and I think you all will connect with it, that the best learning today is happening with peers, not just necessarily with faculty or with a formal sense of it. And we're seeing that live with technology enabled, because you pose a question and you got 16 contrarian or affirmative views on that question from your colleagues before even your professor can answer, which will always have been a slightly more one-dimensional approach to an answer. You're getting 16 multi-dimensionals. So peer-to-peer learning today is something not just that technology offers, but I think we should all look at that as entrepreneurs, as women entrepreneurs, as anybody in that context. You're going to learn from colleagues more than you're going to learn necessarily from a mentor or from a faculty or from a particular situation, and keep your eyes and ears open.
It's interesting that you say that, Ronnie, because my second question to you, I mean, my next question was actually on mentorship. But before I do that, I think that the style of leadership has also changed. You know, earlier it was very hierarchical, but now the sense of leadership has become very influential. So until and unless you're influencing your peers, they may just decide not to listen to you. So I think in order to be at a position where you can influence your peers or your co-workers to take a certain decision, I think has to come from a place of empathy and a lot of social soft skills, along with, of course, the other information that is there. But
and you need to inspire, and you need to inspire also. You need to inspire and it doesn't come naturally. You need to do a lot of homework for inspiring. You don't need a gift of the gab. You don't need to be just fluent in English or in Hindi or in Tamil or whatever else. You need to do some homework, because if you've thought through your answers and you're always thoughtful, you will inspire. People now want to come and work with people who they can grow with, can learn from. And I feel, look, there'll be choppy days and there'll be bad days and good days, but a leader is going to guide us through a lot of that. So that sense of inspiring is a very, very important part of any leader.
So what in our recently concluded steering committee meeting, one of the things that came up was the need of a mentorship program that was aligned very specifically to the needs of the Indian ecosystem. So if I know you did say that, you don't need a mentor just a short while back, but I just still wanted to ask you that what role do you think, or what changed role, or what would be the new avatar of a mentor that you envisage would play a very dominant role in the lives of the entrepreneurs of today? What would be that?
So firstly, I just want to clarify, I didn't mean to say you don't need a mentor. I was saying more than needing a mentor was my context to the other one. I think mentors are good. Mentors are nice. Mentors are great. I think we kind of have a very conventional view on the mentorship. We think somebody should be older than us. They should have gray hair. They should sit on a table and ask, and give me some advice. And actually that's never works, and that's why I brought up peer-to-peer, right? I mean, peer-to-peer learning. You're going to learn from people you're junior, you're younger than you, you're same age or older. In fact, you want to learn consumer products and you want to learn about digital. You want to know what's happening in marketing. You want to know what's happening in innovation. You might need to actually talk to people much younger than you in that context. So how you pick your mentors is no longer that conventional sense. Second, advice is not the best thing, because almost most of the time, the first time it sounds like a honeymoon period, and it's good because they've talked about 5 things that you never heard of. So there's a lot of good sense that, I walked away from here with 5 things I never heard of before. The question is, how are you going to apply them? Because if they're 5 esoteric or 5 very random things or 5 good things, you can't suddenly take that as the gospel and then start implementing on those parts. So to me, the best mentors are where you have a combination of them and not one. Okay. Where you don't get fixated about the age group, because you will need them for diverse reasons for what you want to do. And for me, what's always worked when I've had good mentorship is when people have asked me questions, not given me advice. They've asked me tough questions to which I've said, damn, why didn't I think of this? And that's been the most, because if I can go away with questions for myself to probe myself. That's when I found the best level of mentorship. Because advice, to be honest, it's very difficult for one person to give advice. I mean, it's even today, in today's age, even parents can't say, I guarantee you, you'll marry this man or marry this woman and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. I think those days are gone. So I think advice is one where, and mentorship is pick them, have a few, don't get sorted out about gray hair or age groups. You may find different for different uses of what you want to necessarily do, but really get them to ask you the tough questions so that you can go away and think.
Right. I think that's key. We've all kind of jotted down some of those notes to ensure that, you know, our advisory board is a little more hybrid and takes in some of those comments. Anu, over to you for your next question to Ronnie.
So Ronnie, I was checking your amazing work on working with kids with hearing loss. Now, most of these kids have genetic mutations, like there are other kids who have rare conditions. And I think when we get kids to start off with that, I think they don't start at the same level field, because you are kind of setting them up for failure because they don't get access to treatment, they don't get access to testing or anything like that. So how do we, if we want to reduce this whole fear of failure, how do we change that level playing field for all these children who might not be able to afford things like this? And a second short question is, my first memory of you was quiz show on TV. Is that something that you still do occasionally?
No, I don't, because that's an easy one to answer, because that's something that I did at that time as part of my soft skills training to what I wanted to necessarily do. So coming to your main question, and you know, I'm glad. It's interesting that you bring everything back to genes and whatever else, which is one way to look at life, and that's perfectly fine. So my context here, when we're working with hearing impaired or visually impaired or speaking impaired people, is that it is part of our overall fabric of where we're working in rural India, right? So I think one of the things we've seen is that obviously when you have an element of young kids, for them to be equal in a classroom. And we've seen that. I mean, I think the ones that which work magic, for example, is that we hardly get our eyes checked. You know, and I think in India, we have a sight problem, but it's not a sight problem because it's genetic. It's a sight problem because we haven't really had our eyes checked. And I've seen people at the age of 5, at the age of 15, at the age of 55, when that lens goes down and goes click and suddenly says, oh my God, I was farming for the last 7 years, but now I can actually see what we're doing here. So there's a liberating moment for everyone on their senses, especially when it comes to speech, hearing, and sight. Of course, then there are the medical reasons. So for us, when we work in a health category in this thing, I think in India, I mean, one of the biggest things is obviously malnutrition, right? And nutrition still in India is one of the biggest problems. But some of the symptomaticness is when your body is short of something, it also promulgates and does not allow you to get to some of the other elements there. So I think from a health perspective and a fabric perspective, I think for all of us, we need to over-index ourselves. Also to see that some of the affirmities do not actually get us. I mean, my most inspiring, when I had a board member in our company at UTV, and he was visually impaired, fully blind. I don't use the word deaf or dumb or blind, and I use the word impaired, because I did a theatrical play a long time back where I'm working with a hearing impaired lady, and I went to my first memories of learning the sign language at that particular point in time. And the first thing my teacher said is, please don't call us dumb and deaf and mute. And, you know, we're all impaired and we will get past that thought process. So I think that sense of respect, that sense of balance is very important. But, you know, it teaches you so much in terms of empathy. It also teaches you not to take things for granted. It also gets you to actually, some of those inspirational stories of those kids are quite incredible, because their hunger to get back to normalcy is so huge. And if they can't, for whatever reason, medically or otherwise, or destiny or fate, their ability to make it up and excel. And I think that is a trait that all of us need to do that. If I had one vital thing that didn't work for me, you'd be surprised how much you'd excel in some of the other ones. Now, if you can just for that moment figure out how to excel in it without not having that, can you imagine what life would be for each of us? And I think that should be the inspiration. Yes,
I suppose I I can't say that I can imagine what that would be like because I cannot, but I guess that's one important way of looking at things. And that's the right lens to look at things from, Ronnie. I'm going to quickly jump over to Pooja and Gitanjali to take over their questions before we've got a bunch of questions that have been coming in. So I'll leave the last 10 minutes for that. So Pooja, over to you for yours.
Sure. So Ronnie, at Avishkar, we have a platform to help children next gen tech like robotics, AI, coding, and what we see is that a lot of the gender ratio ends up being same in terms of the interest, but the dropout rates end up being higher for girls. And that kind of seems to be proven even in data later, where graduating out of college, you will see graduating out of high school, you'll see a lot of STEM, about 47% women. But then when you look at scientists, women leaders, etc., it just in STEM, the number just keeps declining. And we've done a few things there. One of the things is around making it a safe space to fail. When you are innovating, when you are dealing with science, you want a safe space to fail. I'm wondering if, given that you are involved with 21, you are the brains behind 21K, UpGrad, and you're thinking so much about education, if you have any thoughts on how do we address this difference in how they take how girls take failure. How do we continue
so Pooja, I would say in many ways, I'm not sure this is only a product of the failure part, if you ask me, because part of the statistics that you said right at the beginning, at that stage, you need your family support. So if the kids have come in at that early stage, and at that stage, you have not made the decision, your parents could be making that decision. So part of this whole thing that I think we're missing out in everything that we're doing here is, we should not underestimate the ecosystem support and the parental support, and I think today, if whatever the statistics are, and we can have at least 20% more of the women in the workforce, if the parents stepped out and said, you can do it, because that is what is really needed. And I think your statistics actually shows that at that early stage, if both are there, they would say, my odds are go with the person, but the boy, because he's going to do it. But the woman, they're going to exit the family. So they're already thinking about marriage, exiting the family, moving to another place. What's the point of my getting my insurance premium done for this, whereas actually it can be done for there? So I think this is much less of an individual's person fear of failure. It's much more that the ecosystem needs to get changed, where the fabric of parental support can change a lot of what needs to be done. And I think, when entrepreneurship, till Prime Minister Modi got up on stage, got a platform and said, Startup India, in that sense. Before, I know a sea change happened with parents who actually felt, no, my kids should not become an entrepreneur. And then they said, Acha, the Pradhan Mantri bol rahe, the Prime Minister of the country saying that, look at all these people here. So suddenly it became an aspiration thing. So how do you move the element for parents to feel aspirational and equal pride is 10 times more important a movement than solving the failure part in this aspect, is what I would say.
So,
yeah, I think that we are probably targeting the wrong segment, because the problems probably lie with the ecosystem and the parents.
Yeah, I think it's wrong for anyone on this call to worry that I've got a problem. I want to carry on, but I was pulled out of the race. If I was pulled out of the race, what am I going to do?
Right. No, that is
my next question is very in line with this. These are two things I've been grappling with, and your views on this would really help. So in your own life as well, you had a keen interest in theater, for instance. You did Othello and Death of a Salesman. And then later on, you also wrote a book, Dream with Your Eyes Open. And with someone like you with these varied interests, you could bring them together into this UTV, that has produced like movies and blockbusters. So your love for theater. And, similarly, for instance, as a child, I had interest in karate. I am a black belt in ballet and spirituality and business. And how do you bring it together? So for me, it was this canvas called Hayal. But as an educator, there are one thing I struggled with is how do you move from this placement mentality, where you place them into jobs, to connecting all the dots that the kids display into, curating what you may call their ikigai, for instance. Okay, that's number one. And number two is that, we have this trend in this country that higher education means moving to greener pastures, which is Dubai and New York and London. For us, it is actually, we consider it a failure if our universities, our students go to that. For us, it is a success if they go back to their villages. And, they use their learnings to make it a developmental village or a smart village.
Yeah.
So you have been always a promoter of this through your movie Swadesh, your Swades Foundation. All your movies like Lakshya, Swadesh, Rang De Basanti have this distinct flavor of unconditional love for the motherland, But where would you place the orientation of youth today? I mean, how can we inspire them to, even the youth from well-to-do backgrounds, to move away from mere livelihoods to work unselfishly towards, nation building? So these are the two issues that I have been grappling with.
So I think a couple of things, that because you brought up quite a few multiple points, but I would just say, firstly, I think what you described as your thought process of what I do, these were all my soft skills. I mean, soft skills is not sit down and start figuring out how, and look in the mirror and start figuring out how I'm going to do that. So for me, theater and dramatics and elocution and debate helped me fine-tune my soft skills. Sports would have done it equally well in a team spirit way, in whatever else one wanted to do. I think today, if you look at how to harness this, there are two questions that I think you've asked. One is the question of outcomes for kids, and how do they get it into their career planning? And I think what you're doing there is very clearly the right way to go about it, which is that you're combining soft skills with hard skills to get them that opportunities. The main point is the exposure. And I think, the challenge and the good part is you're based in Ladakh. Now, one can argue you need to see that they've got the right worldly exposure and not the isolated exposure for what they want to do, because that's going to be quite important for them to be plugged in. And they can be plugged in digitally. But I think their ability today for kids to get exposed again with peer-to-peer is very, very important. And I would overstress on that element of, outside of the fact that you're taking in 10 standard failures, but you're telling them I'll make you and groom you. I think their ability for the real life and interacting with other people and opportunities is a good one. Overseas learning and studying is not all negative.
Okay.
And I think it just gives you a different kind of exposure. And look, where's 8 billion people in the world getting to 10 billion people? So there'll always be that sense of diversity of what one wants to do. And in India, we do have challenges. Our gross education ratio, our GR ratios are 25%, which means obviously we don't have the kind of educational options that people would like to have. So it's but natural that people will do that. The element that I think is helping people is the massive sense of pride that in India and in Indians, people are believing today that tomorrow is better than yesterday. Whereas many other parts of the world, people are questioning whether tomorrow for them is better than yesterday. And I think if you hold on to that one single pinnacle of massive hope and practicality, that's what getting people back. You want to go out, get exposed, so you can come back and use that to the benefit of what you want to do back at home. So that would be my element, that I think the idea is not to curtail. The idea is to let people and liberate them to go out there. And actually their own sense of belonging and the fact that we're a magnet for growth, opportunity, innovation, respect, economy is going to bring people back. And look, even if 60 or 70 out of the 100 people come back, that's a good balance, considering we're 1.4 billion people and going more. So those would be my thoughts for this.
Thank you.
I think Ronnie, Anu has to leave, but before she leaves, you wanted to get in one quick question before we take in the others. Anu, one last question before you leave.
Sure. So Ronnie, assuming that AI and robots take over the world, what skills are important for entrepreneurs to potentially reduce the number of failures that they can get to?
So firstly, I don't think AI and robots are going to take over the world.
That's what I said.
I think they will. Well, if you assume it'll happen, and the point is we can't assume that, because I'm saying very categorically, they will augment, they will get us. But I think the basic thinking power, the basic element of empathy the basic element of crunching data and building your own instinct. These are not things that are going to happen that easily. So it's always the last mile in life that defines success versus failure. It's not about the 9 miles you walk. It's that last 10th mile when you get it, then you really get it right. And I think that there'll be enough aid and technology and innovation, and that'll happen. But instinct, empathy, your ability to be, it's a little bit like COVID actually got us into our homes and got us to stop thinking. There's that much, and it's efficient that we're having this talk here, but it's not the same as having it live in a very different sense. You see body language right now, you're seeing this as my body language, but you'll see a lot more of it when you're looking at people. But I think at the core of it, use them as augmentation, because your basic instinct, your basic gut, your basic empathy, those are the things that are going to drive massive amount of innovation and for the world to be a livable place and not to be, a science fiction place.
Thanks. And I did ask a question without genetics. So
right. Yes.
So, Ronnie, we're going to quickly take a question from one of
Sure.
our women entrepreneurs who've kind of reached out. Her name is Pubali Guha, and she touches upon her fears around hiring. She says that given the tumultuous business environment, do you grow your team in anticipation of business, or let the business first come and then hire? And in the same vein, what should entrepreneurs look for when they're hiring individuals, like different backgrounds, experiences, perspectives? Does that anyway help in mitigate failures or better cope with them?
Look, I think they're two very, very important and very good questions. The first one being, first, do you hire or you let the business be? I think that's part of your leadership test. And I think it's a very fine line. There is no categorical answer, because if you overhire, you're dead. Because when you get people and you overhire, outside of the fact that you have cost and you may think you have the funding, but private equity investors are the most fair weather friends, frankly. And they will pull the plug anytime they feel the weather has changed, not that you have changed. So watch out for overhiring, because two things happen. You spend a lot more. Your revenue is always aspirational and idealistic. Your costs are real, and therefore that will be a challenge. And the second one is, if you overhire, people will get bored quite easily, and therefore you will actually have a higher attrition, because if the work has not come to that level, it won't. So I would say it's a very nimble exercise, and it's a little bit like horse riding or any other sport. You hold if you really want to have a good ride, you don't get on the horse and let the horse take you somewhere. You hold on to it, and it's a teamwork where you pace yourself, and that's going to be the most important one to do. So definitely not overhire, because you're going to have people who will be unsatisfied with their jobs. But go along with it, but it's nimble. It is nimble. And you might find, okay, because what will happen is you have 10 people in sales, but you actually should have had 20 and you double your sales. It's okay. That can be made up in 1 month. But if you don't have the right product and the feedback came back and you had 20 sales and only 2 people got effective, 18 would leave the door. So which one is better? That's what you got to choose, is what I would say. And the second one is, in this world today, it's becoming trickier and trickier to hire people. People say, I need somebody to fit into my culture. And I argue about that, because I'm saying, why? I need people sometimes who are quite diametrically opposite. One of the biggest problems, I think, when I look at people is if they ever want to bring any of their team members with them, then I'm saying you're out, right? Because that's the worst thing you can do, not for any other reason. That means that person is blindsided, does not want to be challenged afresh, because if you're going to be surrounded by people who are like you, watch out for people who are building organizations where they are hiring people just like them, because they're not going to get challenged. They're going to have clones around them. And they'll want not just yes people, but people who finish their sentences. And the 21st century is not about hiring people who finish the sentence for you. It's
Right.
people who challenge you in that thought process. And that's what I would say.
No, I think that's important. And we have another one coming in from Devarchit Vishwas. I'm actually in a hurry to take as many as possible. And she says,
Sure.
I've been dabbling in multiple roles where I'm running a small business alongside my full-time job. I really want to pursue entrepreneurship full-time, but I'm unable to take the leap. Sir, please guide me in understanding when is the good time to take the leap.
Unfortunately, now. Unfortunately, now. Unfortunately, because it's a risk you'll have to take. And now, because that's the only answer. because you can't straddle both. There is no way you're going to succeed as an entrepreneur if you are in the safety valve that you feel you want to be. And I know it's not an easy answer, but trust me, this will be one of your easiest decisions to make. The real tough decisions will come later. Whether I should leave my job is the exact element where you're not going to get tested. And so the right answer is now or never. Now, that does not mean that you will fall and you will say, oh my God, I was earning 10,000 rupees or 1 lakh rupees or whatever, and now that's gone. It is you're making a decision to commit yourself to entrepreneurship or to start your business for a long-term period. And if you hedge, chances are you're not going to succeed in any case.
Right. I think that if Debashis is listening, which I'm sure she is, I hope she's satisfied with that. We have another one coming up from Harshna Paroha, and she says, can you please suggest your choice of 1 or 2 books that you can suggest that really helped you while you were building your business?
Yeah, actually, I don't have an answer for that. I have to say books didn't help me, but chapters did. So if you see I've got a bookshelf here, and if at home, I've got a pretty large bookshelf there. I've picked up books where either a heading or something intrigued me, and I've cherished chapters. I may not have finished an entire book most of the time, and therefore it's a very personal thing. I find it odd when people on social media keep recommending books. It's an interesting one because each one has a very different way on which you want to consume. And time is too precious and life is too precious for you to then go through a list of 9 people's different recommendations. Just go with your own instinct, read the back, see the index, see what touches you, see what intrigues you. This is on the non-fiction side. You want to buy a fiction book, just go ahead and go with the story you like. Some people like it when they're talking about, ikigami in Japan, or somebody else is talking about Buddhism, or somebody may be talking about just a real series of life. Then you can do what you want.
Right. I think that I don't remember anybody ever suggesting that read chapters and not books. So this is certainly going to stay with me, Ronnie. We have one more coming in from Vidya Nair, and I think this is a good I like the question because it's kind of going to some way recap a lot of the discussions we've had. How do you now treat failure? So after everything that we've discussed, how does one achieve true freedom from fear? So how do you go back where we started? How do we go back to feeling free again? So what is it that we can do? So
for me, I do it in many ways. And I've done it when I was 20, 25, 30, and not just at my present age. So don't get me wrong as far as that is concerned. One of the things is if you can laugh about it 6 months later, and that normally does happen. If you can tell with excitement, hey, that happened and I was dead. I was dead in the water. I died, or this thing, it was over for me. But imagine when you say 6 months later, there's a different element to that thought process where you're recapping a near-death opportunity or crisis that could have happened in your life. And that actually is, and the minute you do that once and you articulate that, it liberates you in many manners.
Right.
Second one is when you're dealing with failure, just take the whole thing as a whole and understand it. Most of us don't accept it. And by the time we actually accept it, it's become even deeper of a problem than it is. I think failure comes in a manner where it's not always a rock that's fallen, a big boulder that's fallen on your head. It's coming at you. Sometimes it's like a train, sometimes like a truck, whatever it may be. So deal with it at that early stage, and you might find that you can actually avert many aspects of it, if not the total one. And the third thing that's really worked for me is recalibrating myself, because when it does hit you, you start off thinking, okay, fine, instead of getting worked up and getting unproductive, what are my worst case scenarios? And the minute you start working out your worst case scenarios, you realize that they're not as terrible as you thought they were. And it gives you that glimmer of a chance to start picking it up from there. And that could be for total bankruptcy, telling people that 40 people I've got to let go, or you don't have money to pay salaries, or the rocket failed that you wanted to launch into space, or whatever the case. All of it 6 months later will have a different context. And think about that.
Oh my God, no, that's really compelling, Ronnie. And I think we realize that 1 hour is too small a window to address such an important issue. I feel, given the kind of questions we're getting, I feel that a lot.
No, but I think we covered a lot of ground. And I think, at the end of the day, anything in excess is a problem, and anything with nuggets is always a good takeaway.
I know, I agree, but that is also where WEP, the platform, comes in, because as a platform, we aim to provide the continuum of support for all those who have tuned in today and registered for this talk. And we hope to use some of your nuggets to amplify some of the work that we are doing, hoping that it would kind of resonate with the speakers and with the people who've actually listened in. So any feedback for us as a platform, anything that we could do to make sure that we have our eye on the ball and we don't have any surprises coming our way. Anything for us?
No, I think summarizing things and putting them into context and evangelizing today is very important, because evangelizing inspires people. It makes them feel, okay, more people like me are out there, and I don't need to be the only. Otherwise, most of us live in a world thinking all my problems are only mine. It's actually everybody's.
No, I agree with you there. And I think that in that sense, I think that's one of the aims of the Ask WEP series, where we are kind of taking a fresher view from all the industry experts, recalibrating some of that, understanding that in perspective to the questions that people are asking, and then putting our efforts in the right direction. So thank you very, very much, Ronnie, Pooja, and Gitanjali for this, and of course, Anu, who's logged out, for this exciting conversation. Just the only thing I want to leave you with is that this is not going to be the only time we have you here, Ronnie. So be prepared to give us a little more time, because we may be taking you to some of this and taking this to the next step forward. And that was for the audience. Thank you very, very much. And
thank you.
Hugely appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
A lot of insights to take
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Right.